It's just that button, just remind me there's one button. Did you sign in? Good morning.
Is this yours?
Yeah, oh, I'm so bad. It's Johnny, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Good, keep it.
I thought he had one.
I have one out.
John, good day in Wildcat Land yesterday.
Was, sweet, it was great. You stayed with Wendy James.
I did.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Fine, but yourself?
They finally got their three corners going.
Well, there was another team that didn't quite get it.
Yeah,
How are you?
yeah.
So we've been in some group discussions.
You got your new sketchers yet? Let's slip on sketchers. I've got some. I have to put them all like in the shoe. I think was that right?
How are you?
I think it makes it long.
I'm great.
It's a bit long. Gotta get some long ones, do it. Yeah. Your ankle swelling. Always. We're going to play a soccer.
And I like that you have the impact on you. And next time to sessions all
Back down. That's like,
Did you do it too? Yeah, we're still doing it. So,
I know.
yeah.
So I'm not
I
good
should
at
give a little plug.
There's some person.
But, yeah, online.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. The first year, that's a good discussion. We're working on it. Developing different incentives. And credit. Evidently, like people are like, so they kind of how are you? How are things? They've got their church and it's very nice. Yeah. It's trying to figure it out. Yeah. I try it's hard. They're good. Yeah, so
I like this guy.
It's a lighter one than the heavier one, but you can put it nice. It'll feel good. Yeah. Oh. Well, in this case, you had sciatica.
Stay over the seats and the stairs.
What's nice is that it's something that you can take care of without going to all that
It's
expensive.
like, we were really under.
What a PPE they'll do. You can take it home a little bit every day, which I
Really
think
cool.
will work.
It's like a blue west.
That's the, exercise.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's simple as switching.
They got tired. I guess John's made it.
But I could ride you one, that's good enough, right? Nice ones if you want.
Yeah, like to be able to press the button. Hey, John, how are you? Yeah. So I'm just setting things up for you later. Right? You're doing it. Yeah, so I'm like the one.
I'm good at everything, so many stories.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm very good. I had cataract surgery on Tuesday.
Can't even, I can't even tell. I think you have like.
I've done it every night with babies.
Morning. How are you?
Good, how are you, Greg?
Good. My little tool. To be able to click the PowerPoint out, I see the.
Is that good?
2 minutes, fine.
Hey, Sterling. In our house.
No, so. Oh, good.
Did they all have to?
Handouts. You guys can share. So I don't have handouts for everybody. So we can just take one, and maybe if we can get them around.
But here's one. So you're passing around.
Yeah, I'm passing around a handout. I don't have enough for everybody, but maybe you can share between couples and friends.
We welcome this morning Dr. Graham Bullock. Graham is Associate Professor of Political Science at Davidson College, Director of Davidson in China, Director of the Sustainability Information Lab, and most importantly for us this morning, Faculty Director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative. Many of us have participated in our church's Bridging the Gap conversations, which Graham has helped us develop. Graham is also a member of our church and will discuss with us this morning civil discourse after the election, pitfalls and pathways moving forward. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Pam. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to speak to you both in person and to our friends online. And I think you can, where is the video? But anyway, hello. And I'm afraid I have some slides, and you may not be able to see them directly. If John comes back, then we'll see if we can move the camera around for you. But in any case, I'm really happy to be here. As Pam mentioned, I'm a professor at the college and in political science, and I'm the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, which I think some of you have participated in, either some of our forums or our small group discussions called D-Teams, which are both spaces for people, students, faculty, staff, and community members to engage with one another on challenging and contentious topics. And they might be very local issues as well as national or even international issues. And so I come today with you, maybe perhaps with some thoughts and insights from that work, as well as my work as a scholar in political science. So, so civil discourse after the election, pitfalls and pathways moving forward. So the election is still pretty recent, right? And it may feel a long time ago, but it's still this month. And I think there's this sense, across the political spectrum, that increasingly we stand alone. We are individuals in a society, in a country, in a state, where we often don't understand those across the political divide. We may stand in a crowd, be in a restaurant, be in a church together, and there's a real sense of a gap, of a chasm between us. And we're together, but we have a real deep sense of being alone and not knowing, not understanding why someone could vote the way they did in an election. And again, this is across the political spectrum. And so given this state, this sense of being alone and even lonely, politically and socially, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And we have lots of pathways, lots of possibilities from which we can go and go to. The first, I think, maybe the default, the standard answer is to escape from politics, right? I can't take it anymore. I don't want to deal with it anymore. And that can be if you've won, if your candidates, if your party won. So, okay, I did my duty, I voted, now I can go back to my Netflix, to hiking in the outdoors, or to my books. Get to that novel I didn't get to. And it can be for those who lost as well. A sense of despondency, disillusionment, depression drives us maybe to this need, this desire to escape and to discover other areas of our lives. And to some extent, this is good. This is what we should do, right? Politics shouldn't occupy all of our mind, all of our actions, all of our days and weeks. And to some extent, that's healthy to do this. But it may not be healthy to do it entirely and to give up completely on our collective life and our search for the common good together and our desire to try to understand, to try to bridge that gap that DCPC's series is named, Bridging the Gap. And so, once we do a little bit of this, right, and we continue to do a little bit of it, what do we do? How do we engage or re-engage? Again, many pathways. So you might say, okay, well, we can return to our religious, to our Christian roots and ask what the Bible says, what Jesus says for us to do. And the classic and standard answer there is to follow the golden rule. But you might ask, which one? So we all know, or I think we should all know, the standard golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or love your neighbor as yourself. But there's another golden rule that you might have heard as well. Anybody know what that rule is?
Love the Lord your God with all your mind, body, and soul.
Good. Still on this path.
Okay.
The path of love. There's another path.
He who has the gold rules.
Yes.
Thank you, John.
What was that? What was the answer? What was it?
He or she who has the gold rules.
Yeah.
And we take gold here as a metaphor, as a symbol of something larger, of power. Could be in the form of money, could be in the form of influence, could be in the form of force, coercion. But it's that idea that might makes right. Yes, Joe.
Graham, would you mind to move just a little bit to your right? Your projection is on your face when you move.
Oh, sorry, okay. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm seeing let's see if there's any. There's four people online. So hopefully what I say to our friends online, you'll be able to understand without seeing. I don't know how to move the camera so that you can see the screen. So hopefully it'll be clear from what I say. So which one of these do we do? Do we follow the heart or follow the money? Follow the power. And the power is tempting, right?
Graham, they can see the screen.
Oh, they can?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
It's doing you and them.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, John. Yeah. I'm not, yeah. We don't do this fancy stuff in our classes. So I'm glad John's here to lead. So which one do we follow? And it's tempting. And in some cases, it may be necessary to use power, right? Responsibly. Power is not something we should not ever use. But should it be preceded by the heart, by love? And so I'm going to talk about this route today, mostly, but there is that route too. That's another lecture. So how do we then follow this golden rule? How do we love one's neighbor as oneself? And this is actually, John, a while back, maybe 10 years ago or so, when I was just getting here at Davidson, I was really curious about this concept of humane instincts that's embedded in Davidson College's statement of purpose. The primary purpose of Davidson College is to assist students in developing humane instincts and creative and disciplined minds for lives of leadership and service. Humane instincts, what is that? I was like, what? I've never heard this before. And we went back and looked at it. It's kind of actually a Davidson thing. And John pointed me to the concept of the fruit of the Spirit as a way to think about what those humane instincts are. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. All of these are relevant, to how we can follow that golden rule. I'm going to sort of focus on three of these today: love, patience, and goodness. The first being love and a desire to seek to heal. Heal ourselves, heal each others, and to heal our relationships between ourselves, within our community. Patience, seeking to understand first, and then goodness, seeking to share what your vision of the good life is, of what the common good is. But this is really in order, right? Starting here, then here, then here. If you start with this, it's going to be more difficult. So, diving down a little deeper, thinking about, and more saliently for the election, what do we do in the context of this election? How do we respond? What if our team won? What if our candidates won? Well, there's some guidance from the Bible. Proverbs 24:17. Do not gloat when your enemy falls. When they stumble, do not let your heart rejoice. And there's also guidance for when we lose and when we sense we have enemies who are beating us and have beat us. You've heard it, that it was said in Matthew, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Whether it's truly persecuting you or it's a perception of persecuting. This is hard. This is hard for both, right? Triumph, joy in winning, it's hard to hold it in. I've had students here at Davidson, conservative students. They're surrounded by liberal and progressive students who are very depressed. It's hard for them They see their friends very despondent, and yet they feel this sense of happiness. And then vice versa, it's hard for those liberal and progressive students. So what do we do in this sense and context of challenge? Well, I want to sort of introduce a concept that one of my friends from high school, actually, Baratunde Thurston, he hosted a podcast. I think he's still doing it. Maybe he did 4 seasons of it. It's called To Citizen. And his idea is that we need to turn citizenship into a verb. That it's an action, it's an act to citizen, to be a citizen. And it's something we all can, should, and must do in a variety of ways. Of course, voting is one of those acts, one way to be a citizen, to citizen. But there are others. Volunteering, getting out in your community, helping those who maybe are impacted by the election, for example. Donating, continuing to contribute. Protesting, getting out on the streets when things are really upsetting to you. Or writing your member of Congress, or senator, North Carolina, or at the federal level. And then finally, the subject of what we're talking about today is deliberating, talking, engaging with those who you agree with, organizing, as well as those who maybe you don't agree with, and maybe very deeply disagree with. So how do we do that? Well, that's where this concept of deliberative citizenship comes in. And there's a lot of ways to go about this kind of public discourse. One is just conversation, right? Talking with your neighbor, had a Trump sign out, had a Harris sign out, just talking about the weather, talking about whether the Panthers are going to win next week, right? Very easy, reestablishing those relationships. And then maybe you talk about something a little deeper, a deeper discussion. Maybe it's about those Panthers and whether their coach is going to continue next year or not, or their quarterback. Or it's engaging with some politics, right? Mapping out, what happened in North Carolina? Why did someone win or someone not win? But then we can go deeper than that too. We can then start to share our own feelings, our own perspectives, dialoguing with each other, sharing the evidence, the arguments, the reasons why we voted one way, and the questions, the deep questions we have. And then maybe we can actually debate with each other, to push each other, to interrogate those reasons that we offer to one another, to say, yeah, that actually, I hadn't thought of that before. That's a good point. Let me think about that some more. Or to say, I hear you, but I'm still not persuaded. I'm still not convinced. And this is why. Now, it's not, debates on Fox News or MSNBC News where they talk past each other. You're actually talking to each other. You're responding to each other. Honestly, authentically, earnestly. And it can be tough. There can be emotion there, but that's okay because you've done all this other work. You've established your relationship, and it's not going to be disrupted by a little disagreement or a big disagreement because you have that foundation. And then finally, you can deliberate, maybe. What does that mean? It's coming to some decision, weighing these different reasons, these different arguments, and then coming maybe to something new, some new position, some new idea, some new policy that transcends where you started, back here. Because you've gone through this process and you've learned from each other and you've come up with some new ideas. And this is all animated by a certain ethos, a certain ethic that's captured by James 1:19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. When they say that thing that really aggravates you, Harris was a DEI candidate. Trump is a Nazi. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, take a breath. Listen and try to engage. Try to understand and try to transcend. So, that's the goal, right? But it's hard. No question, it's hard. So how do we do it? What are some pathways? And what are some pitfalls? And we'll start off with some big pitfalls, which I'm going to call deliberative vices. So the first is contempt. As Arthur Brooks has called, a noxious brew of anger and disgust. Or as Arthur Schopenhauer has called, the unsullied conviction of the worthlessness of another. And you can see this can apply across the political spectrum. Contempt across the aisle. And then the second is conceit. The habit or attitude of thinking yourself better than others, even when there is no reason to think so. And perhaps also even when there is. And then also Philippians tells us what to do with this, what it leads to. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. And I put these together because they feed on each other. Conceitful contempt, contemptuous conceit. You're more likely to be contemptuous if you have that conceit that you're better than other people, that you know the truth, and you only know the truth. And if you have this sense that everybody else is worthless, why should you listen to them? Right? You are better than them. They're worthless. So those are the two vices, but as we know, every vice has some associated virtues. Humility. From Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Walk humbly with your God. I've given a whole talk on this 6:8 before, so that's another whole exploration, but you get the idea. We are not God. We do not know everything. We're probably wrong about a lot of things, but we don't know what we're wrong about. And therefore, we need to show humility, especially towards those we disagree with. And then courage. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Including into difficult conversations. Including into those discussions that there's a lot of disagreement. Your God is with you in those conversations. But you have to jump into them. You have to lean in. And it's easier if you have that humility. To engage, to have some curiosity about where they're coming from. And the trick here is, this is all based in a kind of sense of reciprocity. If you want others to listen to you, to listen to what you think is right, then don't you need to listen to them? And truly listen, not just go through the motions, because you want them to truly listen. And how can we do that other than by modeling it ourselves? Okay, so that's big picture stuff, macro, but I know you guys want to know, how do we actually do it? And so I passed around, actually, a guide, the DCI guide to one-on-one conversations that walks us through this. And this is actually a document that I shared for about 4 years, almost exactly 4 years ago with you all. So John and Peter and other pastors asked me to facilitate a conversation back in 2020, 2 sessions online during the pandemic.
Yeah.
You guys remember that? Yeah. And it's the same document. Haven't changed it at all because the challenge hasn't changed at all. How do we engage with each other, especially on your own? So DCI organizes all these events and opportunities, you have facilitators, but we can't be there when you're talking to that neighbor who has that Trump or that Harris sign up, right? With that uncle or that niece who voted differently from you. So how can you engage, right? And it's possible, it's hard, but it's doable. And so we'll walk through some ideas about how you can do this. So first, and you can follow along, this is basically follows the guide. So before your conversation, choose who you want to engage with. Who might you ask to lunch, to coffee, invite to a Zoom call or a phone call? And then what do you want to talk about? Maybe you know that they have a different political alignment, allegiance to you. And yet you love them deeply, you care about them. Maybe their candidate lost and you're worried about them. How are you doing? I'd love to connect and just hear how you're doing. Or their candidate won and you say, I'm really concerned. I'd love to hear your perspective on the next 4 years. Because frankly, honestly, I'm very upset. And I'd love for you to help me understand why I shouldn't be as concerned as I am. Decide on a format. How are you going to do it? Right? Lunch, dinner. It could be one-on-one. It could be a group of people, right? Host a dinner party. People have done that. People did that back in 2016, 2017. And whatever sort of works best for your context. And then set expectations. And this is actually really important, right? You're not going to solve all your disagreements, right? You're not going to persuade them suddenly that, they should have voted differently. That's not the goal, though. The goal is to, remember, love, heal, understand, and then share. But the core question is, who do you want to be in that seat with you? To be in conversation again with you? And then reach out. Send that email. Make that call. Knock on that door. During the conversation, again, this is in the guide. First off is setting the tone. Did I skip that? Yeah, so, I passed around also a set of conversation agreements, a separate one-page thing. I think it's on the next page, but I think it's worth jumping ahead. Yes. So in all of our DCI conversations, we actually share that, like I've done with you today, this set of conversation agreements, everyone agrees to them. Now, in an informal conversation with your neighbor or your nephew, right, maybe it's a little kind of awkward to do that, right? It's like, oh no, we got to have this agreement, before we start eating our salad, but you can model this at least, being authentic and respectful, being an attentive and active listener, being a purposeful and concise speaker. Approach their stories with curiosity, not hostility. Assuming the best and not the worst about their intentions and their values. Demonstrating that intellectual humility. Critiquing ideas rather than people. Noting areas of both agreement and disagreement. Respecting the confidentiality of the discussion. I'm not gonna go tell your wife or your dad, mom, what we talk about, this is just us. And avoid speaking in absolutes. All Republicans this, all Harris voters that. Try to be more probabilistic, more nuanced in your own claims, with the idea that it'll rub off on your interlocutor. Okay, so let me rewind to this. Yeah, so set the tone, start by listening, asking questions, asking good questions. So there's a big difference, between saying, why in the world did you vote for that guy? Right? No, and this is a little bit tone too, right? What's the tone of your questions? As opposed to, I just really want to understand. I don't understand how you could vote for that person. I'm trying, it's really difficult for me. Maybe you could even say why, but please help me understand. Because I think you're not a bad person. I love you, right? But I'm really struggling here. Please help me. And then you can ask specific things too, right? Once you get a little deeper. If there's some particular issue, I just can't see how you could vote for Vice President Harris, given how unable she was to articulate things on her own, to speak extemporaneously. Or I can't see how you could vote for someone who did what they did on January 6th. Please explain. I just like to understand. How do you understand? How do you come at that? And you do it honestly and earnestly. And then you start the conversation. Respectfully, right? And then values, trying to find out, well, what are our shared values underneath? Because they're there. They're just, we are voicing them, we are expressing them. Practice pausing. Again, when you feel that upwelling of anger, disgust, and contempt even, right? Press the pause button. How do you do that? Again, there's some ideas in here. Key one is just physiological, taking a breath, breathing, counting to 10. We tell our kids, count to 10. Well, we have to do it too sometimes. And process, and then try to remember that leaning into curiosity. Remembering the goal. What are you here for? It's not to bop them over the head. It's not to, share the truth with them. It's to understand first and to heal again. And then to show grace too. But this is hard, right? This is very difficult. Sometimes they're not going to say exactly what they think or what they mean. You're not going to say exactly what you think or you mean. You're going to generalize. You're going to speak in absolutes sometimes. And so just show grace. And, if there's something offensive that they say, you can share that, but in a respectful and honest way. I hear you, but this is how I'm feeling when you say that. Can you understand it? Is that really what you mean? Or is there something else that you mean that's maybe a little different than how you said it? And then after your conversation, and this is critical, because it's not the end. It shouldn't be the end. It should be the start. I'm losing my, some mess up here. That's my last slide, but again, it's in a lot of it's in here. So first thing you can do is reflect together. So end the conversation and say, how was that? That wasn't so bad, was it? And what did we learn? What did we not talk about? Maybe that we want to talk again about next time. Have that kind of reflective component to it. We do it in DCI. We save 5 to 10 minutes at the end, and you can do that too. And ending with gratitude, thanking them. Thank you for taking this time. I know it's hard for me, but it means so much to me that we could have this conversation. And then to follow up, to send an email, send a text, make a phone call. Again, I really appreciated that conversation. And I'd love to continue. And even if it doesn't go as nicely as we'd like, and I've heard this, right? They just went on and on. Oh my God, I just didn't have space to say anything. That's okay, right? Remember, healing, understanding, that's where we start. And it may not all happen in one conversation that's an hour long over, drinks or coffee or a meal. You're investing in the relationship. It might take weeks and months, many times, before then they finally ask, well, what do you think? Why did you vote the way you did? But that's the work. That's what God calls us to do. So, with that, questions? I've got a little activity if we have time. I think we do, but for us to think about this a little more. But I want to give some space first for people to ask questions about any of this that I've covered so far. So.
If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll pass on the mic so people on Zoom can hear us.
I'm thinking through this graph. It occurs to me it would be easier if it was a set-up situation where you have a group of people who have identified themselves as one side or the other, and the opposite side, and someone to facilitate it through this. Some of that going on.
Yes, actually. So, and then there's more opportunities to do so. So we actually hosted an event right after the election, the day after. We actually called it that. And on campus in the 900 room, Ike Bailey, who's a professor in communication studies, and I sort of agreed this would be a good thing to do back in August. And, we assumed that, like most of the conventional wisdom, that there wouldn't be a result, right? 24 hours after. And so with the result, we thought people aren't going to be ready to talk, right? It's going to be too hard. But we had 25 students there, which for Davidson is an outstanding turnout for any event, especially, given the context. And they really engaged, and we had people from across the political spectrum there, and they were able to talk. And we had facilitators, our fellows who trained in how to moderate these conversations, and we had some questions. It was pretty light, it wasn't as structured as some of our other events. It was trying keeping it more open, but that is a way to do it, and I prefer that. And I think that's better. It's more likely to be successful and constructive. But recognizing we don't have enough fellows to go around, right? If all of you guys went and got trained in how to facilitate these conversations, that would be amazing. Plug, right? So every September, we host an 8-hour training program. You all guys are welcome to join that. But in the meantime, we don't have that sort of capacity. So I think we need to figure out how, and so we can organize, and they're working on some things for the spring with the Bridging the Gap program. So that could be maybe incorporated into that process. We're going to be hosting some things. We're working on a forum on religion in the public sphere for February. And then we have D teams. I think we're going to be covering public health topics, which is increasingly salient for obvious reasons. So there's opportunities, but it shouldn't be. We still need to try to do this, I think, and if you have the opportunity to call up that uncle, call up that nephew, call up that neighbor, and try, So.
I wonder if it would be easier to take a particular subject and talk about it. I mean, I feel very lucky. I don't know many people that I need to call up right now.
Yeah.
You know, but I am interested in the subject matter, you know, and what in the world they think about immigration and how that can work for our country.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely an option, and there are resources out there that can help you. You know, that there's a Living Room Conversations is a website. They have dozens of guides on different topics. DCI, we have guides. Another one is called National Issues Forum. They have guides on different topics. So immigration is one of them. And, you know, some are very simple, 1 page, right? Some are 30 pages with more kind of background. But I think it's a great idea. And you know, the other way to do it is, you know, there's the sort of idea of book clubs. Well, you could have a conversation club, you know, or I think a lot of, you know, sort of relatives are spread out all across the country. Over the pandemic, they sort of started getting together on Zoom once a month and talking about topics. I think there was a phenomenon, you know, post 2020, you know, where people got together to talk about racism and sexism and, you know, post kind of George Floyd, trying to understand those dynamics, which I think is great and important. But I bet there was not a lot of conservatives in those conversations. And so, you know, that uncle was probably not invited. And so how could you design it in a way where that uncle, that nephew, whoever does feel welcome? And so.
Thank you so much for coming to this class. I had to leave very soon, but what really makes me wonder, but I have heard so many people say that I don't like that guy, but I like his policies. In my life, anytime I had made important decisions, I always like to look into the person, the character. And if person is not to me trustworthy and nor proven to be untrustworthy, anything that he or she says, I really cannot trust to come true. So this election has really shaken me from the core of my really discernment and Christianity. And I had to leave question to you, but this is what I feel. It's very difficult for me to recover. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question and that thought. And I know it's pretty common, a common feeling. Just out of curiosity, and maybe this is, because I want to go into sort of activity in a moment, but this will help me sort of think about that. How many of you have had a chance to talk to someone who voted differently in the election since the election?
That's good.
So just a couple though, right? So most of you haven't, maybe you will. So I have as well, and I can say that sort of challenge is just very top of mind for people, right? You know, and and it's very hard to even enter the conversation, you know, with that sense, right? That they're just on a different planet. They're not in the same moral universe as us. And so, you know, and I'm trying to be sort of balanced in this. So for the Harris voters, it's that sense of a lack of trustworthiness. For the Trump voters, it's a sense of the world is really falling apart, right? We're at the verge of World War III. The country is falling apart. You know, the economy is, you know, problematic. There's all these cultural problems. They have a sense of crisis, right? Deep crisis. And so how could you vote for someone who doesn't show efficacy, doesn't show capacity, doesn't show competence to manage those issues? And they believe that their candidate does and has. Now, we can disagree, right, with that, but that's the feeling. And the analogy that I've thought of, I like comics and superheroes and stuff. It's not just my kids, I like them myself too. You can imagine Superman is getting beaten down by somebody, by a Metallo, is one of his villains, right? And he's got a shoots kryptonite out of his chest, and Superman's getting beaten down. Who should he turn to for help? Lex Luthor is there. Lex Luthor is able to help him. He's got this big battle suit, but we know Lex Luthor is a bad guy, but he can knock out Metallo. We're pretty confident. Lois Lane is there too. Nice girl, nice woman, but she doesn't have a battle suit. She's not going to be able to help Superman. So I'm willing to go with Lex Luthor, despite, even though I know he's a bad guy, he can save us. He can save Superman, AKA America. Right? So if you see it from that perspective, it's not as crazy as we might think initially. Again, that's just the logic. You may disagree with the assumptions, but that's the logic. And if you can get there, then it's a little less like they're in a different moral universe.
Thank you for being here, Graham. I'm a little embarrassed to ask this. I really appreciate the tips you've given us. Any advice on how to get to the point where you want to talk to someone?
Yeah, so rewind to my escape and discover slide.
I'm still there, right?
Yeah, and that's okay. That's okay. We might need that. We might need that more, just generally, right? And through that process of reflection and taking a break, right, we may recharge and re-energize and rediscover, right, our motivation, right? I mean, I think as part of that, sort of thinking deeply about our values, right? Returning to the Bible, to church, to, what are our core values here, and that can also be another source of motivation, of inspiration. And then, every, crisis is an opportunity, right? That if your candidate lost, it's a chance to reconsider, and think about it and analyze why, right? What can we do differently? And this is the gift of American democracy, of democracy generally, is that we have a chance, and there is usually a pendulum, right? So Jon Stewart, I think it was Jon Stewart, showed on his show last week the map of the election in 1984. You guys remember this? Walter Mondale, Ronald Reagan. It was much worse in terms of that map. It was almost completely blue. Completely red. And yet, 8 years later, you have a Democratic president with a new mandate. So there's always that hope, and that possibility. And so you can start working towards that, but you might need to take a break first.
Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah.
Graham, a lot of us have watched Jimmy Kimmel. One of the things that he does, of course, every now and then is go out on the street to interview folks. It seems to me the real difficulty in having an honest conversation is that many of us come from extremely different base of knowledge. It's frightening, what you hear from some of the folks on the street and just basic knowledge of how things work. And I'm wondering, how do you overcome that? Of course, probably most of us in this room are not going to be dealing with very many folks that don't have some basic values together. But when there's no common base to work from, it seems really difficult.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, I guess I'll say two things. One is sort of general encouragement to try to find opportunities to share our knowledge, your knowledge, with others in this way, right? Respectfully and honestly. Then there's policy, right? I'm a political scientist, there's policy things we can do. And there are some things we used to do that we don't do as much anymore. Civics education, right? So why don't people know as much as they should? Well, we've stopped teaching civics in a lot of states. Well, and when we do, we're maybe not as effective as we could be. And so how do we reinvigorate that? So I actually just sent an email Friday to become a charter member of an organization trying to encourage civics on college campuses. But it obviously starts below that, starts K through 12. And so how to encourage that? And frankly, why has civics declined? A lot of it is from the left, right? Sort of a sense of that it's indoctrinating or, something like that, sort of looking at the history of, and a lack of recognition across the board of its importance. And a sort of instrumentalization of K through 12 education. Got to get the science, got to get the math, got to get the reading, got to get, et cetera. And then so we eject that basic part of the curriculum. So that might be one thing. And there's new versions of it. Sandra Day O'Connor was a big proponent of revitalizing civics education, not making it just what is the three branches of government, but engaging what does it mean to be a citizen, right? And having it be more, how do you say, empowering. So that's one. So
Hold on. There are a few people who said they've had conversations with people who voted differently. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share how that went. Maybe not so much.
When I got into the conversation, I really didn't know how the person had voted. And in the course of the conversation, realized. And this is someone who I don't know super well, but a person I like and has been very kind to me. And so I was making a real effort to stay calm. And I think she was too. But I made a statement and she said that she found that very insulting. And I explained why I said it. And we both remain calm. And I think it's because it's, kind of a new friendship. And that's what I think it is. It was hard. And it left me thinking. I've thought about the conversation a million times since, because we talked about a lot of different things. But we did it calmly, which is unusual for me right now, I will say. But the last time that I had a conversation with someone about a particular candidate, she ended the friendship. That was it. No more contact. So that was one conversation I had. The other conversation was with a brother. And we had conversations before the election. He had changed his views all of a sudden and was supporting the person I couldn't believe he was supporting. And so after the election, he calls me, I didn't answer. He called me again, I didn't answer. Finally, my husband says, you've got to talk to your brother. So I finally called him back, and he did not say a word about the election. So I did not say a word about the election. And that was the way we dealt with that so far. Now I have another brother. He's going to say something at some point, and I know he will. And I will try to use this because I'm like you. I don't really want to talk right now with anybody who has a different view. I mean, that's just where I am.
I love your honesty. Well, everyone's honesty.
Missy, I almost fell.
Oh,
I know, I was a little
treacherous.
stressed.
Well, mine was a surprise. I happened to see this person the day after the election, and we had been sort of dancing around, where she stood with it. And we saw each other, and pretty quickly she said something, well, that's quite a night last night, wasn't it? And she wasn't, saying yay or anything like that. And she said, how do you feel about this? And I said, well, not good. And she said, well, it's, she as if she sort of agreed with me, but she said, let's just give him 4 years. Let's just hope that maybe he can do some of these things. And I just totally relaxed when she said that. Because we're kind of back on common ground. So I give her the credit for doing it.
Do we have time for your activity? Maybe not.
I think the activity, not for the full activity, but a mini version of it, which is to just turn to a friend, someone sitting next to you, and chat for a minute about what. So the activity was to sort of role play this kind of conversation, but I don't think we have time for that. But just to talk with somebody near you about what questions you have, what are the blocks you have, what next steps you might take. You're here in a conversation about, civil discourse after the election. Where might you go from here? What's one thing you might do? So, and then we can share after 2 minutes or so.
One of the things that they have accused us of is being elitist or, knowing the right answers to everything. And I find that very difficult to enter a conversation with those terms. And I wonder if, I can imagine some of my smart people thinking, oh, here she comes with this, list of how she's gonna get something out of me. And, she's got a formula for working it out. And I wonder if, the smart ones are gonna figure that out if you're playing it.
My question is, I wonder how we got to this point. Who would have thought that we would be taking a Sunday school hour to discuss why people voted like they did, but it's so divisive. How did we get here? I need your answer.
How did the country get so divisive?
Yeah.
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 Well,
So-
Graham, answer that one.
Okay, good. I taught a whole class on that question. So in 2018, Davidson Washington program, I taught a course on polarization and partisanship in American politics. This last summer, in DC, I taught a similar course. So there's a long answer and there's a short answer, which there's too many. So going back 50 plus years, there was a sense and a debate within political scientists and also among politicians that do we need to have more clearly defined parties? Because back in the 40s, 50s, it was more, these are two parties that were very overlapping. And there was frustration, actually, mostly from the left, civil rights activists within the Democratic Party, that we have these Southern Democrats who are blocking everything we want to do on civil rights. And so do we need to have more definition where there's two parties kind of clearly defining each other and clearly fighting against each other, presenting different visions? And there was pushback. A different vision was, no, we have enough differences, right? We need to have our parties, our political system should be unified. And they should basically be the same Big Tent efforts, and they compete on how well they perform on that Big Tent project, right? Who can represent Americans best, not who can represent these people best and who can represent those best. And then there was a report from the American Political Science Association recommending this to have the division, right? And then that came to fruition over time, over decades. And so that's what we have now. We have clearly defined choices. And then I'll say, I might want to come back to your question too about the elitism, but there's even a more longstanding debate about our division, our balance of powers. And this is something I've talked to my students about a little bit too. People say, oh, they control, the whole government. Oh my God, it's like the end of the world, right? But that's like everyday democracy in the UK. That's parliamentary system. They control everything. They win, they get to do what they want to do. Woodrow Wilson, political scientist, president of Princeton, president of the United States, governor of New Jersey, he advocated for that. He thought the founders were wrong to separate powers. So there's different, and you have a more active government, an executive who can actually get things done. And then you have an election to see if you agree on what they did. So, those are kind of two quick answers for you. On the elitism stuff, and then we have to go, but I don't know if I'm standing where I should be, but for the online people, but the elitism one is hard, right? Generally, I think on the one hand, there is some truth to it, right? We come with our degrees, our, Ivy League distinctions, right? And that can be really off-putting to people, right? And then we come with this sense of like, we know it all. And so returning that humility is really important. That's why I kind of led with that, right? However, on the other hand, you can push back a little bit, right? So do you want some amateur fixing your car? Flying the airplane you get on? Building your bridges that you drive over? I'd like an elite bridge builder. I'd like an elite pilot, right? To fly those, to do that work. Wouldn't you also like elite policymakers, elite politicians, and not amateurs? And then see what they say, right? So, and then maybe it's defining what elite means. Well, elite, should be also including able to engage with the public, able to talk to that blue collar worker as well as that white collar worker. And that's redefining what elite is. And that elite should also be about character, not just knowledge, and having humility and having those processes. So, and then the specific point about this process as being elite, kind of a cover for like liberal propaganda and indoctrination, right? So I've definitely gotten that. What's the response? Is that, well, what is your specific concern about this process? And let's engage with it, right? Do you think the topic is framed in a way that is, biased? Okay, well, let's talk about what that is. But the basic premise is one of egalitarianism, is one that everyone has a right to be in the room and to express their voice in that room. And that's what we're deeply committed to. And if you have a problem with that, okay, what is that problem? And let's talk about it. And then we can have a conversation. And it may be that we do disagree, that you think that, only white people should be able to talk in the room, or only people who are disadvantaged should talk in the room. And then we can say, well, that's not how we operate, right? That's not the premise of our project, and we can walk away understanding why we disagree. Does that make sense? But most people, I think 95% of people aren't gonna say that, right? They say, okay, yeah, I'm committed to that too, but let's see it in action. And then when we fail, then we do better, right? We say, okay, I'm sorry, you felt, that you were treated unfairly there, and we'll try to do better. We're human, right? But we always try to improve. So, and that maybe is a sort of note to end on, is that this is hard, right? And we're not always going to do it well and perfectly, whether at the micro level, having these conversations with your brother or your neighbor, or at the macro level and running elections and picking candidates. But the human capacity to improve, to reflect and improve, is something that we can end on. And then also, since we're a church, I did have some final thoughts. Remembering God's sovereignty. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. Modeling Christ's love. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And then finally, being a light in the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. And this has been inspiring and ultimately comforting. Thank you.
All done.
Ultimately, well, I love the honesty.
Yeah.